From February 26th to March 1st, the Home and Garden Show was at the Minneapolis Convention Center, and the American Lung Association teamed up with Minnesota EV owners to showcase a Tesla Model 3 and a Jaguar I-Pace and talk about other EVs in their booth. I had the opportunity to be there Thursday afternoon and Sunday morning to mid-afternoon to talk EVs with a lot of attendees. Jaguar of Minneapolis provided a great-looking I-Pace with 22-inch wheels that got a lot of attention. Unfortunately, they asked that we keep it locked, so although there was a lot of curiosity, there was only so much we could discuss without a more in-depth experience. Tesla provided a Model 3, and it was in dealer or demo mode, so people were able to get in and experience the car, just no rolling. There was a lot of interest and enthusiasm and a ton of good questions. I talked to one couple who was very excited about their Ford Mach E reservation, and they wanted to know more about home charging and getting that set up. There was a Clipper Creek charging unit in the booth, and that was a great point of reference for them. Another handful of people were anxiously awaiting their Cybertruck reservation in a couple years, while other people stopped by to lament its angular looks. I found myself steering a lot of people in that latter group toward Rivian for a more traditional look that will ship sooner. The I-Pace, starting at $70,000, was pretty steep for most of the people I spoke with, but the Model 3, starting at $39,000, was a welcome surprise to many. Since it was open, most of the action centered around the Model 3. But I can't tell you how many times someone would be sitting in it and say, well, I love it, but I just wish there was an SUV. I'd bring up the I-Pace and the Model X, but there again, price became an issue. When I described the Model Y and mentioned that early deliveries would start in as little as 2 weeks, a lot of ears perked up, and some people even took notes to look it up later. Not a guarantee of sales for sure, but I think it confirms, at least anecdotally, that the Model Y will be Tesla's best seller by far, especially once it's in wide release. Most people who weren't interested just walked by, but I got a couple gems of negative reactions. First was an older lady who thought the center screen on the Model 3 would be too distracting. I explained that although it's not for everyone, most people get used to it pretty quickly, and a lot of people enjoy the larger view in front of them. She was certain that no one could get used to such a thing, and that was the reason we were having so much distracted driving on the roads. I invited her to get behind the wheel, thinking that perspective might help. It didn't, and every new feature I showed her just convinced her more and more that people would be playing with it all the time when they should be driving. Eventually, I suggested that maybe a Chevy Bolt or Jaguar I-Pace would have the buttons and switches she liked. She still stayed in the driver's seat for a while, fuming, which is an odd thing to do in a car you seem to hate. The second was far more straightforward. The guy was looking around the car, and I offered that he could hop in if he liked. He said, nope, I just wanted to see it. It's the ugliest interior I've ever seen, and walked away. Now there's a man who knows what he likes. Aside from those two standouts, overall I'd say the show was a great success. Especially since we were in the back of the show floor with not much signage, so really only the cars to draw people in. Even with that, and a slow show floor on Thursday night for the rest of the booths, I was supposed to leave at 6, and there were so many people around asking questions and wanting info that I didn't leave till almost 8. I did the last hour with my jacket on, but I was having such a good time, and it was really hard to leave anyone hanging. I know there's going to be a similar experience at the auto show, maybe with test rides and drives. Then, as the weather warms, there's going to be a lot more experiences. Ride and drive events, cars and coffee, and eventually the state fair. So this summer is going to have a lot of opportunities to have your first EV experience or to have your questions answered. Well, it's still fresh in my head. I wanted to go over some of the common questions we were getting at the booth. First, how does it handle in the winter? Well, our Model S is all-wheel drive, and we haven't had winter tires on it, but it's still a tank in the snow. The low center of gravity and the weight of the battery keeps you really planted even in snowy and icy conditions. I've heard people who have winter tires say it's even more incredible, and people who have the Model 3 with only rear-wheel drive, I've heard a lot of comments that it handles fine in the snow as well. You can get a Model 3 with rear-wheel or all-wheel drive. How does the battery hold up in the winter? Well, generally it's not a problem for your day-to-day driving. If it's bitterly cold, I'm talking like below zero, and you've got headwinds, and you're driving on slush and snow, and driving fast, you might lose up to half your range. That's why I generally encourage people to think about a vehicle that has at least 250 miles of range, because on those really terrible days when everything's at its worst, you still want to be able to get a decent range out of it and not be worried. And on that note, rated range is kind of like your miles per gallon estimate. It's kind of based on ideal conditions and good weather. You start driving super fast in cold weather against headwinds or towing things, you're going to start losing some of your miles per gallon as well. How far does it go on a charge? Well, that varies greatly depending on the vehicle you choose and the trim level you choose. But the vehicles in the booth, the I-Pace gets a rated range of 246 miles, while the Standard Range Plus Model 3 starts at 240 miles, and the Model 3 goes up to 322 miles. The highest EV range right now is the Tesla Model S, and at its highest level it gets up to 390 miles of range. How long does it take to charge? Well, this again varies greatly. So, in general, if you're on a road trip and using the supercharger network, your stops can be from 20 minutes to absolute worst case scenario, an hour, hour and a half. On our recent 4,000 mile road trip, most of our stops were between 20 minutes and 40 minutes. That's what the car needed. Now, sometimes we needed more than that. When you're at home, you generally charge overnight when electricity rates are cheaper. And if you have a charger installed in your garage or a higher voltage plug, you'll be charging between 2 hours and 6 hours, depending on how much we drove that day and how high we want to fill up the battery for the next day. But generally you're charging overnight when electricity rates are lower, and you wake up to a full battery however long you needed to charge it. If there's no gas backup, what do you do if you're out in the middle of nowhere and it dies? Well, that's pretty unlikely to happen. You're going to get warnings and things before then. And if you really are stuck somewhere, your vehicle comes with a mobile charger that generally has adapters that can go all the way down to a 110 plug. And since almost any place you're going to be is going to have some sort of electricity, you could plug into a 110 outlet on the side of a building or someone's home with their permission, and you're not going to get a fast charge, maybe 4 to 6 miles an hour, but it's something to get you out of a pinch in a worst case scenario. Well, how do you find the chargers? Well, in Teslas and really most EVs, you can use the navigation in the car and it will show you where charging stations are. There are also apps like PlugShare, a better route planner, and a few others that make it really easy to find chargers around you and on your trips. What happens if the battery dies for good? Well, if it happens under warranty, they would replace it. But generally, at least the Tesla batteries are rated for between 300 and 500,000 miles of range. And they're talking about creating a 1,000,000-mile battery. Now, it's not to say that something couldn't happen, but if you're in warranty, it's not an issue. And by the time a new vehicle would be out of warranty, generally battery prices are falling pretty quickly. But what happens to the battery at the end of the life of the vehicle? Well, a lot of people are working on this. There are some cases where it can be used for home or grid storage, or other companies are working on different ways to shred and recycle some of the valuable materials within the battery. And from my understanding, there's enough in it that it makes more sense to do that recycling process than it does to just stick them in a landfill somewhere. So people are working on that, and I'm sure there will be more solutions as we get into the future. So those were my big takeaways from the Minneapolis Home and Garden Show. I hope people had a good experience and learned a little something, and maybe their next vehicle will be an EV. The Minneapolis Auto Show began on March 7th, and in between shows there were a lot of events in the world that changed things quite a bit. Events in North America were beginning to get canceled. I volunteered to help with EV test rides on Friday the 13th, so I was able to be there for a few hours before they shut down later that afternoon. Tesla wasn't there because the show is run by the Auto Dealers Association, but XL Energy was hosting test drives in the Mitsubishi Outlander, the Audi Q5, both plug-in hybrids, as well as the Chevy Bolt, Nissan Leaf, and Audi e-tron all-electric vehicles. Given the global situation, there wasn't a huge sample size in a very empty show. but far and away the Audi e-tron was the most popular for test drives. Once we got word that the show was closing and there weren't any lines left, I took a drive in the Audi e-tron myself. It's a nice vehicle, it drives well, and Audi people are going to love it. But it wasn't quite my style. It may have just been the way it was set up, but the brakes were very touchy, which is easy enough to get used to. But the odd thing to me was that the power delivery was just the opposite. The ride-along person gave me the go-ahead to gun it, so I put the pedal down 3/4 of the way and was expecting a lot more. If I had pushed that hard in my Tesla Model S, we would have been flying. But the Audi's set up to deliver power a little more gradually, so it's more like a gas car. So it wasn't quite the big punch I was expecting out of the Audi. The next opportunity I had, I put it down even further, and then between 3/4 and all the way down, I really felt the torque and acceleration that I had been expecting. So it's there, just not right on top. I realize this is a very subjective thing, and there are probably a lot of people who would see this as a more refined power delivery curve. I really wanted to love driving the e-tron, but it felt like they were hiding the power at the very top and trying to make it too much like a gas car. Although it's not for me, it's a great car and it's clearly getting people very interested. I would have loved to drive the rest of the cars, but there wasn't time. And unfortunately I didn't get to see too much of the rest of the show either. But I did see the I-Pace in the Jaguar area, but it was locked like at the Home and Garden show and wedged into the back of their space. Ford, on the other hand, did a great job in their space, making the new all-electric Mustang Mach E really stand out. It was cool to see it in person, and I thought it was the most stylish of all the EVs at the show. It would have been great to test drive it for comparison, but it wasn't available. Overall, I was really impressed with Ford's display and seeming commitment to making this car take off. I really hope it does well for them. I had more good conversations with people, but a lot of them were the same type of things that were covered earlier in this video. The downside of the show being hosted by the Dealer Association is that anytime I'd bring up Tesla or would steer someone in that direction because it fit their needs, I kind of felt like I was saying a dirty word. The show shut down at 3 p.m., but hopefully we had a chance to help some people in the time we had. Hopefully things will settle down in the world a little bit, and we can still get some of those great EV events in over the summer. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks for watching and have a great day.